Well, and I endeavor, if I didn't have the first meeting of like the New Hampshire Ambulance Association in like 10 years, I think they're resurrecting that association and they want a little update. So I will keep us to schedule. But you guys, honestly, I love the questions are fantastic and they're thoughtful and you'll leave me with some work here. So I'm always grateful for that. So, all right, we're just going to talk a little bit about workers' compensation, and I am gonna accelerate parts of it because I think there'll be parts that you'll be like, yeah, hell, we know that. But one of the things that I'd say are this is a missed opportunity for a lot of folks when it comes to when it comes down to costs and finances. So you are aware that there are, of course, the OSHA regulations related to in work injuries and one of the things that I do know for a fact is that, let's see, Colorado is an OSHA state. So that just means that you have to follow the Occupational Safety and Health Act, which was passed in 1970, to essentially say, hey, we are going to have standards. There are going to be rules and regulations around workplace safety. Keep in mind that in many instances, right, there's this bad fire that happened way back when, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, when the owners used to lock and put chains on the doors, and unfortunately one day it caught on fire and killed almost every employee in the building. And so there are now requirements that we maintain a safe work environment. And those are about risks that we knew of or could have known of had we conducted a reasonable inspection. Most of you are familiar with these forms, which are the 3 forms that are mandatory to complete every single year. Up until about 3 years ago, you were required to post the 300A form, the summary of illnesses and injury in your workplace between February 1 and April 30th. Now you are still required to, except for you are also required to electronically report your injury data to OSHA via the injury tracking application. That has been mandatory for several years. Now, the reason they're doing that, they're going to publish that data, just so you know, they're going to redact patients' employees' names and so forth, but they're going to publish it because their belief is that sunshine is the best disinfectant. And they believe that if people are functionally publicly shamed in the square for an unsafe work environment, that they will get safer. So just some quick injury statistics for EMS. What we know, all right, and this is the latest data that was available, right? Roughly almost 17,000 injuries in EMS, just to give you an idea of the breakdown, right? The majority of those were male. That's because right now we are still largely a male majority profession. And the average age was, if you look, it's interesting. Take a look at the 25 to 34 range, because what happens, we come in, relatively undamaged in our early 20s, and then by our mid 20s, we get broken all up. I have had both shoulders, 3 knees, a spinal surgery, and most of that, except for one of the knee surgeries, was due to my years of work in EMS. Our most common injuries are, of course, sprains and strains and back injuries. I always say knees, shoulders, backs are the major injuries. And just to give you an idea of what those cost, because this is a financial summit, right? Basically, you should know that on average, if you have an injury that involves lost days, it's going to cost you about $40,000 per injury. Now, most of you are insured, or all of you are insured, but just recognize, right, if you have a back injury, it's going to be about just under 38,000. If you have a knee, we're talking about 35, hand, finger, 25, arm, shoulder, nearly 50. So it's expensive. But one of the things that I think we do a major disservice of when it comes to EMS leadership, and this is just because of my years of working in HR and because I'm one of those people that just keeps asking questions, I wanted to really understand how are the comp premiums calculated, because every so often we would get an annual audit of our comp premiums and they would say, hey, your payroll changed substantially from last year. And by the way, even though you had no more injuries, you owe us money because you had a larger payroll last year. And I'm like, well, how the hell does that work? Why am I paying more money? And they would say, well, because we had the exposure to an injury that may be reported later in the future. So just so you know, of course, the National Council on Compensation Insurance really sets out the various codes that are for each these classification codes, and in particular for high and low hazard industries. Now we have our own specific code. I think it's 6219. I should know off the top of my head. Actually, it might be here. Nope. So I just want to talk a little bit about how premiums are calculated, and this is important. If you're an EMS leader, you need to know this. If you're a leader of any kind, you need to know how they're calculated, because you have the ability to impact those costs. One of the organizations I worked at, we had 1,000 employees. We were able to reduce the cost per claim by nearly $9,000 in the incident by 46% in 1 year. So, and by the way, it was pretty simple things that we did to do that. So just so you understand how the rate is calculated, there's what's called the manual rate. All right. And that is the rate paid per $100 in payroll based upon your classification code. So for ambulance services in general, in your state, what's the general injury code, or what's the general incidence, right? Because they want to come up with there's a profile for EMS injuries. Then there's this manual premium, which is essentially your payroll times the manual rate. So this is why when once a year, they will generally do a premium audit, which essentially takes a look at, you'll send in your payroll reports. And if those payrolls change dramatically, let's say suddenly you gave a 30% raise, or you took on a service area that you didn't previously had, or you bought another company, you are going to end up paying a bunch of money to them for the prior year's incidents. I mean, for the prior year's payroll, even though you may or may not have had any injuries associated with that additional payroll, you still are going to pay that. And then there's an adjustment after both the manual rate and the calculation of the manual premium for an experience modifier. So just to give you an idea, an experience modifier is what your own organization's injury rate functionally is, right? So it's an adjustment made to that rate based upon your modifier. So people will ask you what your mod is. And so if your mod is a 1, just an equal calculation is, hey, basically if your modification factor is 1, for every $1 in premium you paid, they paid out $1 in claim. So the goal is for your experience modifier to be lower than 1. So the want is a 0.94. I've seen as low as a 0.84. I've seen as high as a 1.5, right? Which means essentially, if I have a 1.34, for every $1 in premium, the insurance company paid $1.34 out in claim. Now, one thing I know about insurance companies, they never lose money, because what do? The next year, they hammer you. So it's important you understand, right, that if your classification code 7705 and your rate was $12.13 per $100, or 12.13%, right, you had 50,000 in payroll, this is how your premium would be calculated. Now, is this part important? Not really, but you should understand it. The part that's really important in my mind are if you've never looked at your loss run, and a loss run is a report, I'm going to show you an example of it here in a second. Your loss run is a list of all of your injuries that have occurred over a given period. And generally, it'll include not only the given period, but if you have any claims open from a prior period, it'll show those too. So it's important that you take a look at those, and you don't just, when an injury happens, let that go and let them do whatever they want with it, right? Because what happens is the insurer is going to assign a claims adjuster to that claim. That claim, right? I say, if you want to impact your claims, mandate or tell them that you want the same insurance adjuster for all of your claims. So, hey, now the problem is, if you're a big organization, less likely to happen. Even if you're small, sometimes it's less likely to happen because they just randomly assign claims. One of the things we did was, we're like, no, we want one person that I can pick up the phone and call, and they can go over all of my claims when I need them to. So the claim value includes both the amounts. So essentially what happened is there's an injury, and based upon that injury data, of that injury information, so for a shoulder, it's 49,000. They will reserve, or basically count against you, $49,000 for that injury, with, in fact, an administration fee. As bills come in, they will then pay out certain amounts. So what they do is they add the paid plus reserved for an incurred amount. Then the paid amount is the money they actually physically spent so far. The reserved amount is the money that they're still expecting to pay based upon the nature of the injury. So this is one of my clients' loss runs, just one page of one loss run. And if you want to see, the way you look at it is you can see there's an employee name, there's a description of what the incident was. So if we look at the first one, it was an accident description. Employee was leaving client home, dark outside, stepped on uneven ground, heard a crack and fell on her left side, sore left knee and shoulder. She's limping, right? So that tells you a little bit about, that'll be on any loss run that you have. There'll be a policy number, a claim number. There'll be the claim type. There'll be the date of the loss, the report of the loss, and the type of injury. Now, the important thing is to look at the OS reserve, right? There's a medical part and an indemnity part. The medical part is the amount of actual medical claim, and the indemnity part is the wage portion of the claim, right? So if somebody loses time, then there's an indemnity part. If they just had a cut and got sutures and they had no lost time, there should be nothing on the indemnity portion of the claim. So if someone just reported, oh, I got a needle stick, and it was just an exposure, we're going to run it through, and there's no lost time, there should be nothing under the indemnity portion of this claim. So it's medical is one part, that's the actual medical cost, so the treatment or any medical costs that were related to this, doctor's fees, medical equipment, whatever. The indemnity part is the wage part. Now, this other part, so the reserve is how much they said, hey, we had a fall with a left knee and a left shoulder. Now, in this instance, this claim has been closed. As you can see, the status C to the left of the red medical piece, that's closed. So they no longer have any reserved on it because the claim is closed. It's resolved. The person's back to work. If the claim were open, there would be an amount in the reserve column. This is an area where you have an opportunity. If the employee got hurt, and let's say the employee's back to work and has been back to work for a week or so, and when you look at the loss run, they still have some money reserved in the medical portion, and they have some reserved in the indemnity portion, I would call them up and say, hey, person's been back to work now for a week. I want you to eliminate the indemnity portion of that reserve, because when they calculate your premiums, they take into factor any amounts that were paid or reserved, all right? Because they count it as a potential loss, and they're going to use it in the calculation of your next year's premium. So when you're coming up on a renewal, and really you want to stay on top of it and get that stuff removed off of there as quickly as possible. So, like, for example, if it wasn't closed, I'd be like, why is this still open? Please close it, because it also factors in the number of average lost days that you have. So the open claim status. So the sooner a claim gets closed, the lower it will impact your premium. All right. So as you can see in the red columns, what's reserved, in the green column was what was paid. Those are really the only two major important parts. This column that says sub-row salvage, that is if in fact the person fell at a Denny's and it was because there was a defect in the Denny's parking lot, or they were rear-ended by somebody else you might try and subrogate or recover some of those monies from their insurance. And that's important, by the way. Some people even subrogate off of a patient's homeowner's insurance if, like, your employee fell in the yard. I don't know how I feel about that, but some people do it. But that's just to give you an idea of how you want to read these. And if someone's back to work, there shouldn't be anything in the indemnity column. There may be what was already paid, that's fine, but the reserve part should be cleared. If it's closed, and the goal is to get these things closed as quickly as possible. So just some quick workers' comp strategies. All right, insight. Understanding basically how the calculation works tells you what you're going to pay. Now you want to figure out how you can lower what you're going to pay. And so really straightforward. You need to make sure that your payroll is accurate. If you've had any major adjustment in payroll, let's say you gave a 50% across the board raise, you have two options. You can sit on it and wait until they audit you, in which case you're going to have to pay, or you can contact them and say, hey, we're about to do a substantial increase in pay, or we've bought another company, we're bringing on an additional $100,000 in payroll. You're going to want to adjust our premium now. Depends on your practice and money and how you want to play with the money. Some people say money in your pocket today is more valuable than money in your pocket tomorrow. It just depends. Others like to pay their fuel bill the same amount every month, even though in August they're not paying any, they're not using any. They just want to know exactly what the payment's going to be. It's a decision for you. Make sure your employees are categorized appropriately. If you have an employee who's doing, who's all in billing, they should have a different code for category of employee, and they pay a different rate than what your field employees pay. So make sure you have your people categorized correctly. Make sure your modification factor is correct. And then again, work with one workers' comp claim rep if you can. I say if you don't have an occupational health care provider or you're not using urgent care, you keep your employees out of the emergency room functionally at all costs, unless they actually need an emergency room or they've had an exposure. If they've had a needle stick or an exposure, you want them going to the hospital the patient went to, because their infection control will make sure the ball doesn't get dropped. Other than that, you want them at urgent care or occupational health, the less expensive place to get care. Also, you should work with those workers' comp and occupational health folks. Give them copies of all of your job descriptions so that they understand. Because what happens, employees go in and go, oh, I have to lift 400-pound people all the time. I can't work for at least a week. They put them out. But if you have the job descriptions, make sure you talk with your occupational health folks, right? That, hey, we have maybe you have a back to work plan or a light duty plan. You want them to know that, so that when the employee's like, hey man, they don't have any work for me to do that doesn't involve lifting. Well, actually, we've talked with your employer and they have a back to work plan where they have you come in and do alternative or light duty. Oh, okay. Right. You want to make sure that they understand what your process is, right? And that you can get regular updates from them. Now, I do have a work injury form specific for EMS, because what we know is that most of our people work for more than one job. And so most work injury forms only say, how many hours a week this week did you work? Well, what mine says is, how many hours a week this week did you work? How many hours a week this week did you work for anyone else? Why? Because if you get hurt at my place and you have a second job, my workers' comp has to pay your average weekly reimbursement at the rate, the appropriate work comp rate. If you work at two jobs, my workers' comp has to pay for both jobs. So you want to know. The other thing you want to know is if they possibly got hurt somewhere else, right? You may go, geez, is this the kind of injury? If they work at a dry cleaner and they got a burn on their arm, guess what? It wasn't done at your place. It was probably done at the dry cleaner, right? So that's why I'd say use a form that, by and large. And by the way, they're long. If you have an employee that's hurt, you can plan on taking an hour or two to fill out the damn report. The better data you collect, the better off you are, and the more likely you are to be able to manage your claims cost. Staying in contact with the claims rep. I used to call our claims rep every Tuesday morning. It was Tuesday morning, right before we had our scheduling meeting, so that I knew what the status of every single person was. Right after I talked with the claims rep, I called every single person who was out on injury. Why? Well, because when I'd call them and I'd go, hey, it's Scott. By the way, if they're talking to me, they're not talking to, well, they are talking to a lawyer, but they're not talking to their lawyer, right? So what I would say is, hey, it's Scott, what's going on? How you feeling? And they'd go like, man, I haven't gotten paid yet from the insurance company. I'd go, well, I just talked with the claims rep and they told me they're waiting on your wage statement. So you got to, oh, I didn't know I needed to do that, right? So staying in touch with them and making sure that they know, right? Because it sucks to get hurt. And the last thing you need is your person sitting on the couch watching Jerry Springer, right? Getting more and more angry. And then, by the way, watching those freaking Morgan and Morgan lawyer commercials, right? Like, you've been injured in an accident. What you want is for them to see you as the point person or the contact person, right? Again, that's how you legitimately impact cost. Lighter alternative duty programs, this has gotten a little sticky because what the law now says following an AMR case is that, hey, if you offer light duty to individuals who have been injured at work and have restrictions such as no lifting, you have to offer light duty to women who have been who are pregnant and have light duty restriction or have restrictions on lifting as well. So essentially what they're saying is, hey, if you offer it to people, now some people go, well, no, it's only for work-related injury. Yep, I understand that. That does not mean you have to offer it to the person who was skiing and broke their leg. No. But for women who are pregnant, if they have a restriction on their lifting, or they have some medical related restriction related to their pregnancy, they have a special place in the law. And if you offer light duty to people who've been injured, you have to offer light duty to those women who are pregnant with restriction. I would do a light duty offer letter so that if the person turns it down, what happens if you offer light duty to someone and they say, I am not coming in to stuff envelopes, thank you anyways, the insurance company can stop paying the wage or the indemnity portion of the claim, and you will save money. By the way, it will also motivate your employee to come back to work, right? How can supervisors impact work comp? Well, first and foremost, by monitoring behavior. This is probably the number one way to prevent injury, is by monitoring people's behavior, making sure that when you see them doing dumb stuff, you help them not do dumb stuff, right? A lot of times people aren't trying to, they're just forget, they get lazy, they get tired, they forget to put the stretcher in transport height, not in load height, they forget to lift with their legs, not their back, again, any of those things. These are those forms that I have. They are fillable, so you can keep them as electronic if you want, or you can just print them out. They do not have my logo up in the top corner. It's just a little box. This is just here for this purpose. Also a little pamphlet. That little pamphlet says, hey, I'm sorry, you've been injured. Here's what you can expect. It's going to be, X number of days before comp starts paying you. Until then, you can use sick time. Hey, here's what we expect of you. You are going to have to notify us of any medical appointments you have. You are going to have to stay in touch with us once a week, right? I mean, again, it stinks to get hurt, especially if you know you're going to miss a paycheck. And most of our people are not in a position to miss a paycheck. So give them information. If you give them information, they are more likely to do what you need them to do. Following up in regular contact with an employee is absolutely critical because, again, if they're talking to you, they're not talking to Morgan and Morgan. All right. And you don't want them talking to Morgan and Morgan. So staying in touch with them. And also, it's super lonely and a little bit scary to be out of work on injury. Right. Again, we don't really know what to do when we're not working, a lot of us. So you want to stay in touch with that person. If you have an employee who calls in and says, hey, geez, my neck and my back hurt, I think I suffered an injury at work, there's a couple things that I would do. First and foremost, one of the ways that we were able to reduce injuries is if I'm like, hey, do you want to go home and rest it? Or do you want to go get checked out? Some people have a hard and flat rule. Nope. Every injury that gets reported to us, we're having them get checked out. Some people are like, I think I tweaked my back. I'm not really sure. Some people, by the way, wanted to go to the Snoop Dogg concert and they couldn't get the day off. So they said, oh, I got hurt. They go home. If that's what happened, while I don't agree with it, you don't want to spend, $700 or $800 in an emergency room visit because they wanted to go to Snoop. Just say like, look, if you want to go home, rest, and then tomorrow it still hurts and you want to get checked out, we'll have you get checked out. We saved a boatload of money that way. And we even paid them when they went home. And people go, well, they're just going to do that all the time. Nope. Guess what? You only get one of those. After that, we pick up on it, right? And so that's one way. Some people don't agree with it. I say, hey, go home and rest it. And if you want to get checked out tomorrow, that's fine. We can get you checked out tomorrow. And by the way, half of the time they go, you know what? It actually feels okay today. And if they come back in and they go, yeah, I think I need to get checked out, well, then you can send them to occupational health. Or if they come back in and they go, no, I'm good. And then they go, oh, it really hurt. It's okay. If they came back in and said, no, it's fine, right? That's okay. Now, I'd still track that on my injury log. You're going to want to go ahead.
Sure. So Are you saying that if they want to go see Snoop Dogg and they said, "Oh, my back hurts a little bit," should we still fill out the first report of injury right then, or wait until that next day and see how they feel?
Yeah, my opinion is I would fill out the first report of injury, and I would log it, right, because arguably, so it depends if you had lost time, right, like meaningful lost time. I would still fill out the report. I would still, would I notify if they don't seek first aid, beyond, if they don't seek health care beyond first aid, it's actually not reportable. All right, I would log it, keep it on, a separate log. But if they don't seek first aid beyond, if they don't seek healthcare beyond first aid, then technically it's not reportable. So again, that's my feeling is, if what my seeking suspicion is that they're like, look, the person is just like, I'm wiped out, I'm tired, and I don't want to do any more call. If you give them a long distance transfer, their fourth long distance transfer, and they're like, that's it, I think I'm hurt, I would probably send that person to go get evaluated. Why? Because I think that person is being a punk. If what I get the sense of is that, like, they're like, I did something, but I'm not really sure, you know, and they're not like per se requesting to go home, right? Like if you're like, okay, you want to get evaluated? If they're like, well, I'm not really sure I want to get evaluated, then I might say, all right, well, why don't we send you home? And if tomorrow you still want to get evaluated, we'll let you get evaluated. It worked for us. It may not work for you. It worked for us. Did we have a few people that I'm relatively sure were full of crap? Yeah. Yeah, I am. And the next day, and by the way, when they tried to pull it a second time, I disciplined them because I was like, hey, I know what's going on. First of all, don't post a picture of you at Snoop. Bad idea. But that's just my opinion. Again, what I would say is, if they don't seek aid past basically a band-aid, right? Because if they nick their finger and they get a band-aid, you actually don't have to report it. Right? If it's beyond first aid, then you have to report it. Make sense? Maybe.
It's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you.
So I but I'm also a fan of, if you do the injury report, right? If you start filling out some of the injury report, or and by the way, it turns out that the person's like, yeah, I'm not injured, then there's nothing that says you have to per se log it as an injury, because under the regulations, it's only if they seek care beyond first aid. So, but you may have, like, let's say, for example, your own internal log, so that if this person pulls this crap a couple times, you're like, hey, we're noticing a trend. Friday nights, you are getting injured, right? Then you could address that issue. That just one way, like I said, if the goal is to try and prevent, try and reduce costs, this is one way to do that. So this is just what that form looks like. That box up in the left-hand corner is where you would click, and it would ask you if you wanted to upload your own logo. Again, it's long. It has an authorized release for medical records. It has a declination. If someone's like, nah, I don't want to get checked out, but you're concerned, like, you kind of like, you're like, geez, they're reporting the injury, I don't want to get checked out, I might have them decline medical attention, just so that you have the form, and you can prove that in fact they weren't interested in getting care. Now that doesn't mean they can't come back in a day or two and say I want care, but just to give you a quick look, the top part gives you some of the information, right? What's their primary language, what's the division, their area, the work type they have, whether EMT or paramedic. As you move on, the number of hours that they worked, right? And please list any additional employers or job titles that you might have with the hours. And then, were you injured at work? Are you reporting the injury as a near miss? In your own words, tell us what happened. And then it, keeps on moving, keep moving on to what time did you arrive at the incident. Again, the goal is to catch as much information as you can to document it, for them to document as well as possible. If they're scribbling big NAs through it and you're like, well, no, I need you to fill it out, then that's fine, right? You can just say to them, no, I need you to actually complete the form. Again, it's long. And a lot of people are like, well, this is long. And I go, yeah, because somebody got hurt at work. And it probably, if we're not wrong, it's going to cost you on average, what do we say, $41,000, I think? It's going to cost you on average $41,000 if somebody did $50,000 or $41,000 worth of damage to your ambulance, would you have them fill out some paperwork? Right. So again, declination of medical attention, authorization of records, and then this goes with them to the occupational health person. This is the advantage to having an occupational health provider that you work with, or an urgent care center. I contracted with a chain of urgent care centers so that no matter where our people were in New Hampshire, Maine, or Mass, if they got hurt, I could send them to that Doctor's Express. And so it was an urgent care center. They had a copy of all of our job descriptions. They had a copy of this work injury form, so that if I didn't have to have them come back to get the damn form, I could say, just go to Doctor's Express. They have all the paperwork there that you need. And usually the supervisor would go there and meet them. So again, that's the advantage to working with an occupational healthcare provider. Needless to say, I would send that off to them. I'm sorry, Kathy Lester from the AAA is sending me a message at the moment. Let's see. All right, so I would then send them off. I would send them off to that. I would have that record there, make sure the paperwork gets completed. And if you don't notice, this form says, hey, can the person come back to work? Can they, under what conditions can they come back to work? What kind of, in other words, hey, we are an organization that wants, if you have a blank, right, you won't just get a little prescription pad that says clear to return in 2 days. What miracle happens in 2 days that means they can't come back to work right now, but something, the hand of God is going to touch them in 2 days and they can come back to work? No, I want you to tell me what this current current employee's situation is. This is that pamphlet where it says, like, hey, what are your responsibilities? Adhere to the medical restrictions, both at work and at home. Keep all medical appointments scheduled. Keep the HR informed. Submit any medical bills that you may get. Right? See the human resources or immediate supervisor if you have any questions or problems. Pay your portion of the healthcare premiums. Right? These are things that they go, well, I didn't know that. Yeah, you did, because I gave you the form. And by the way, my logo's in there, but your logo would just populate right in there. So again, if you just leave it to your health insurance, your work comp carrier to do it, they don't care. Just so you know how health insurance companies or work comp insurance companies make money? By processing your claims. The more claims they process, the more money they make. So you want, by the way, them to process fewer claims. And if you can, they don't care whether you do. They're going to send in people to say, we're really concerned with your modification factor. We want to lower it. We need to help you get smarter or safer. They do not care. They want to make money. All right. Not that they're evil, but just so we're clear, since the Affordable Care Act was passed, the functional share price of all of the major insurers in this company have gone up over 1,000%. Just so you know, thank goodness it is affordable. Now, the supervisor report, this is not the one you were just looking at. This is a separate report that the supervisor completes, because arguably you should be doing some sort of root cause analysis to figure out what happened and why did it happen and how can we prevent it from occurring in the future. So I won't waste a whole bunch of time, but one of the things that this form has is it says, hey, do they require admission to a hospital? If so, you have to notify OSHA. Do they? Now, that's not, they got admitted into the ED. I mean, if they're going to stay in a hospital, they're getting admitted overnight, then you got to notify OSHA. If they lost an eye or had an amputation, you got to notify OSHA. If there was a fatality, by the way, it's not 24 hours. That's a mistake. I already had it corrected. I just didn't update this. It's 8 hours. If you have a fatality, you have to call OSHA within 8 hours of that fatality. All right. That's on this form. So when the supervisor's filling it out, right, they can't get past this part and go like, oh, I'll call my boss on Thursday. No. If it's a fatality, you got 8 hours. All right. If 3 or more employees are hospitalized as a result of the incident, OSHA must be notified, and the phone number's right on there. All right. So I know we only got look at that. Holy hell. That's the biggest ass Band-Aid you've ever seen in your life, just for the record. You guys you have more ability to impact your work comp claims than you will ever realize. And if you leave it to the claims adjusters to do this, you are one of 8,000 claims that they are currently processing. They do not care about you. I mean, they may care about you, but I doubt it. All right. And so what I would say is You can impact it, and you should impact it wherever possible. So that being said, questions?
How do we get the forms?
Oh, I'm going to email it to Kim as soon as I finish my New Hampshire Ambulance Association. I actually started the email and it was drafted, but I just never hit send. But I don't have all of the forms attached yet. So I will send those forms to you. I will send the total compensation forms, and I will send the work injury forms, including the pamphlet, the supervisor investigation form, and the work injury form.
We've got a question from online.
Yep.
What if the physician or provider that the employee sees is also employed under the same parent company as the employee? Is that a conflict of interest?
Wait a minute, one more time on that.
What if the physician or the provider the employee sees is also employed under the same parent company as the employee? Is that a conflict of interest?
Well, conflict of interest is an interesting concept, but no, I would say that in that instance, the healthcare provider, the doctor, by the way, I can assure you, is not like, damn, I better get this person back to work because we're going to save some money. What I would say is, in that instance, the employee is a patient of the doctor, and the doctor has a professional obligation to treat that person like they would any other patient. Is there a conflict? In other words, I have less faith in, when people are like, oh my God, the paramedic's going to drop an IO in just so we can charge more. I'm like, really? You really think so? I don't think so. Just like I highly doubt the ED doc's going to be like, well, I need Joe paramedic back on the street because this hospital really needs the paramedics out on the street. I just don't buy it. But no, and in some instances, by the way, the only healthcare institution in the county may be the only one that you can go to. Again, one of the advantages to working with an occupational health group or an urgent care center is, like, think about all the ambulance rides you have. And by the way, we are self-selecting for emergencies. Probably 10% of them belong in an ambulance, really, or they're true emergencies. Oh my God. Which means that, like, out of all of your workplace injuries, probably only about 10% require an ED. So if you can keep them out of the ED, keep them out of the ED, right? Just because, again, the ED is probably 3 times more expensive to get an evaluation, and nobody wants your employee in the emergency room. Just so you know, they don't want you in there because your lower back hurts. That's not what they want. So that's just my opinion. Other questions?
Any other questions? Tim's got his mouth full, so he can't talk. So I think we're kind of at the end of it.
That is unfortunate. I'm just kidding.
There's 6 of you remaining online. You hardy souls who have stuck it out the entire day.
That's impressive.
I see nothing else from online either, Scott.
All right, guys. Well, Kim, I'll send you those forms. It may be a little later tonight. Just with some, I came out of after the last one. I went to go run to the restroom, and it was pitch black, and I'm not ready for the change of season. Just not ready for darkness. But it's what we call the dark times. Winter is coming. Anyways, all right, guys. Listen, I can't thank you enough for tolerating me for 4 hours. And what I always say to people who sit through any of my sessions, I'm not lying when I say, pick up the phone and call. Do not be shy. If you want something that I have, just ask me. I will happily give it to you. My email, although I thought it was on here, is smore@moreemsconsulting.com. Super easy. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.